Now in this episode, I'd like to go into detail on setup. Setup is a very broad term. It could be as simple as where you run your handlebars and levers, and it could be as in detailed as the cam timing of your engine. So I think it needs a distinction before you say the word setup. So for example, I'll talk now about the rider setup, which is the things that we're in touch with. We've had quite a lot of questions about the seat foam that I'm using. So for me, I'd like to get slightly lower into the bike. So although it's only a small amount, I've gone with the smallest, thinnest foam that I can purchase. And this particular one is actually the deck grip off of a surfboard. So you can buy them at any surf shops and things like that. And they have a very thin but grippy foam, and even has the adhesive back on it. So you can just peel the back off and stick it straight onto the fiberglass seat unit. Another personal touch that I like and I have used for years is the grip on the tank. I think it's fairly common now for people to be familiar with it. I feel that having the extra grip on your outer leg allows you to hang off the bike as far as you need to and have good grip contact with the bike without loading up your hand. So if you're someone that suffers with arm pump or something like that, just as simple as putting a bit more grip on the bike could allow you to have a softer grip on the bars and relieve some of that tension you may be creating. So I've already mentioned the seat, but I feel like the seat and footrest work in conjunction. So if you've got a position that you're comfortable with and then you lower the seat by 15 mil, you also need to then lower your footrest by 15 mil to recover that comfortable feeling position. In one of the earlier videos, when I was first assembling the bike, I had the folding foot pegs on the footrests, and I've since changed to fixed solid footrests, and people have asked why you would or wouldn't use the folding ones. A couple of reasons. One is, let's say you were to lean over and clip a curb or do something uncharacteristic that would force the footrest to be able to turn, then the footrest would be folding downwards in the wrong direction and restrict you from finishing the race or finishing it in a strong position. Where if it was just turning, sure, it would be uncomfortable, but you could still carry on with the race. Use your feet a lot to steer the bike, so any kind of chance of it being able to move because of a particular position you got into would be inconvenient. And another reason is a more practical one for the mechanics, is that when they change the shock, they'll often need to support the bike to allow the swing arm to drop down and work on the suspension and linkage. And they put footrest stands on. So the stands slide over to the footrests and support the bike. And if they were pivoting, then the stand wouldn't be able to support the bike. If you're chasing improved horsepower, then the engine setup is quite a complex task, where in this case it was the easiest part of the project because I was leaving the engine completely standard. The bike started out as a demo, so it already had a few hundred kilometers of road riding on the engine, so it was run in before I received it. So I'm just here in the dyno room. I've come down to BC Performance to see my friend Kelvin, and he's ran the bike up just to check that auto blipper and quick shifter are working, the engine's making good horsepower, and that nothing from my original build is going to fall off. So yeah, we're quite happy with how this has all gone. If this were a purely race prepared engine, then a run-in period would be required, and as it's a race bike, then you can't legally take on the road to do this process. So most teams and engine tuners choose the dyno option because they can control all the elements and monitor all the temperatures and pressures that might indicate a problem before it becomes catastrophic. So even though it wasn't absolutely necessary for me to put this bike on a dyno, it just gave me peace of mind before I went to the track to know that everything was running as it should, and also that interest of if the engine's going to perform to the high standard that we anticipated it would. So I'm just setting the oil level here, which is another tuning option for forks. It's very common practice at the racetrack, and it's another element of tune and adjustment that we can do. So these forks have a closed cartridge, so the oil level that I'm setting is separate from the oil that's inside the cartridge and controls the damping. So really what I'm doing is essentially controlling the air gap inside the fork, which whilst you're riding will be acting as a secondary spring. So if you've got more oil, then you've got a smaller air gap, so the fork will become stiffer. And if you've got less oil, you've got a bigger air gap, so the fork will feel softer. This effect will be most felt at the very bottom of the fork travel. So another regular sight in the pit garages at racetrack is fork spring changes. Now, these cartridges came standard with a 10 rated fork spring, and I want to go to a 10.75. Now, you would imagine you would match both fork springs together, but it's not necessary. And also, every time you wanted to make a spring change, it would require pulling both forks apart. Where in this case, I'm going to run an 11 in the right-hand side and a 10.5 in the left-hand side, giving me a 10.75. And then if the forks were feeling too soft and I wanted to go up a rate, I could just disassemble the left-hand side and go from the 10.5 up to 11, and I would get the required stiffness from the bike with only the work needed to do on one side. So this isn't really specific to setup, but it's certainly little touches that help. So I've cut a chamfer on the leading edge of the brake pads, and that's just to get the disc to slide in between a little bit easier. I've also made this little aluminium hook on the side so that the chain will stay out of the way when you're trying to refit the wheel. Tyres are the most important thing you can put on your bike. They are literally the only thing connecting you and your machine to the surface of the track. So in British Superbikes, we have a controlled tyre. In the Night series, it's completely open, but I continue to use the same tyres as I would use in British Superbikes, just so it's familiar. I just use the softer rear option because the races are shorter and the temperature is quite high, so I need and want that extra performance. So then it could be said that the next most important thing is your tyre pressures. And to do that, you'll need a quality set of tyre warmers. Now, hotter doesn't necessarily mean better, but you need something that's going to give you a consistent and stable tyre temperature, so then you can more accurately maintain your tyre pressure. So I'm at Sydney Motorsports Park. Bike is fully prepped, ready to go. My debut ride, and we've got wet. Weather is not playing ball with us today. Although there's some improved weather conditions that direction, but this is the direction the weather's coming from. So it's now 1:45, and I can say that things have not improved. So I still haven't been out on track, and it doesn't look like I'm gonna. So latest update is the day has finished, and it's still wet, but the sun's out, so there's definitely a chance of going racing this evening, just no practice before I start. If you feel disappointed, think about how disappointed I am. And in hindsight, it was quite lucky that we did get the chance to run the bike on the dyno, because my day of riding and fine-tuning the bike at the track was spoiled by the bad weather. At the race, I ran 1543 gearing based on my own knowledge and information that was available from other people that had ridden recently. And for me, on this particular bike, it was too tall. So I was only just getting into top gear for a short period of time, but probably more importantly was, for an example, turn 2, where the RPM was too low. It wouldn't have been suitable to go back to first gear. So staying in second was the best option, but it was still, the RPM was too low. So this pattern repeated a few times around the circuit. So for me, I definitely need to go shorter on the gearing and make the bike more revvy. So I can move from a 43 to a 44 or even a 45 potentially. And that may seem very straightforward, but I'll go into it a bit more detail and see the problems that it brings. I think gearing's far more complex than people give it credit for. So I'll do my best to explain it as I understand it. And if we look at this chain that's on the bike now, it's 120 links. So for me to make this chain shorter, I need to remove a whole link. And that will be 2 spaces on the sprocket. And that'll bring this chain to 118 links. But that'll mean an adjustment of 16 mil on the axle position. So if you're happy with your setup of your bike, suspension and turning and position, 16 mil of change on your axle is going to have a really big influence on how your bike performs. So for racing purposes, they've come up with a half link. So if you can imagine, you move it 1 space on the sprocket, but then you wouldn't be able to put a regular link in. So I won't explain this, you'll have to use Google or something, but there is an option in racing for a half link that just brings it 1 position at a time. So that will change the wheel position by 8 millimeters. So at the race, I was running 1543 with a half link fitted to the chain. So it was 117 links, and that was giving me 608 millimeters of swing arm length. So that leaves me with 2 options. One is to use the 44 tooth sprocket with 118 links and adjust my swing arm length back by 4 millimeters to get the chain tension correct. So I'll go from 608 to 612, making the bike a little bit longer. Or I can go with the 118 links and go up to a 45 rear sprocket, and that'll keep my swing arm axle in exactly the same position, the 608. There's no one perfect setup, magic number. It's always an evolution of changes that's continuous. So just because you've got a setting that you're happy with this weekend or at this track, if you move to another track or even the same track on a different day with different weather conditions, all the settings on your bike might need revisited and altered again. So I'll go over more settings and more changes that I do along the journey.